Hello, my name is Raul Angulo. I'm a retired captain from Ladder Company 6, Seattle Fire Department, and I am the author of the new 4th edition Engine Company Fireground Operations, published by NFPA and Jones Bartlett. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about this book and why I wrote it. First of all, I want to ask you this question and ask, who ultimately invests in your training and who's responsible for your training? The answer is you are. Your department's going to provide all the required training, annual certifications, but to really become an expert at firefighting and to develop your expert knowledge about the job, it's really up to you. And what you invest into your education is ultimately who's going to bear the cost of the training. You will. And that's always stuck with me throughout my careers. I knew that I wanted to be good at my job, and the information had to be sought after. It wasn't going to be spoon-fed to me. And so I spent a whole career doing that. I retired from Seattle with over 35 years of dedicated honorable service, and I had 2 years prior to that, so I have over pretty close to 38 years in the fire service. And it's not that I retired and thought, gee, I think I want to write a book about Engine Company Fireground Operations. That's not the case. I was asked by my peers and ultimately by Bill Larkin from Jones Bartlett Publishers if I would author the 4th edition of Engine Company Fireground Operations, which is the original work by Harold Richmond. Chief Richmond has long since passed, and there has to be quite a bit of information that needed to be updated from the 3rd edition. And actually, it's a complete rewrite. It's about 3 times as thick as the 3rd edition, and there's a lot of original work in here, so it doesn't even resemble it, but this is a continuation of the Harold Richmond series. I'm currently working on the 4th edition for Ladder Company Fireground Operations, and that should be out next year. But let me talk a little bit about this book. When you look at the fireground, it's been common knowledge that for many years we would say there's 100 fireground deaths, LODDs, line of duty deaths, on average per year. In the recent years that's gone down, but we still have a lot, and a lot of those deaths are not occurring in the active role of actually rescuing a civilian. Taking nothing away from those who have made the ultimate sacrifice. Bottom line is they're still dying in buildings with no civilian life hazard inside. And that's bad. That's not why we signed up. I think your perspective changes when you have line of duty deaths within your own department. I myself in my department have experienced 7, maybe 8, and with close friends in other departments, the number's up to 12. And when you have a line of duty death, especially when the only lives that were lost were firefighters, that changes your perspective on firefighting. And so with that, we've developed countermeasures to try and reduce those numbers. In the last few years, there's been a big emphasis on rapid intervention teams and firefighter survival skills and self-extrication skills, and those are all good, don't get me wrong, but really that's not really addressing the problem. That's solutions to try and get us out of the problems that we keep getting ourselves into. And so with that in mind, if we're still killing firefighters on the fireground the same way, then you have to ask yourself, well, what's the curriculum teaching? We have to examine how we're teaching firefighters. how to fight fires. And that's what this book is all about. So I spent probably a total of 5 years since given the project working on this book. I spent a couple of years reading about all the current information that is out there from Engine Company textbooks, because I did not want to regurgitate the same old things. There's a lot of basics, obviously, that have to happen, but I wanted to do a paradigm shift. I wanted to do something different and original with this book. So after a couple of years of studying to get a pulse on what was out there, I took and really dove into the UL NIST studies, their findings and their recommendations, and tried to implement them into the strategy and tactics of all phases of Engine Company operations. That's what's big in this. So I start this book with an introduction that kind of takes a pulse on where we are as a nation. What's happened, where are we? A lot of tool innovations, nozzle innovations. We talk about all the UL NIST comparisons between the legacy fuels and modern fuels. I move on into fire dynamics, which is fire chemistry. That subject just gets touched on in drill school. Maybe you get an hour of it in the curriculum. But if you really understand fires, everything comes down to understanding fire dynamics. And you really can't understand the conclusions that NIST and UL are presenting unless you first understand fire dynamics. So I spent a lot of time going over fire dynamics and how fires grow, how they spread inside of a building, which leads to the second chapter, building construction. It's not one of the more exciting subjects, but that is the battlefield. Everything that happens inside the building, and firefighters are getting killed inside the building. So there's a building construction chapter. Then we go through the UL NIST studies. I did my own review on that and analysis and conclusions on that with my own narratives. And those all start the basis and foundation of what you need to do to have effective Engine Company Fireground Operations. One of the more provocative chapters is going to be Chapter 8, the SizeUp chapter in developing a QIAP, which is a Quick Incident Action Plan. Now in the third edition, SizeUp was only 2 paragraphs long, or it took up half a page, half a column, and that was SizeUp. I wrote a whole chapter on SizeUp, and there's a lot of things that need to go into SizeUp and connecting all the dots. Once you do the SizeUp, which my approach with a Quick Incident Action Plan covers the VTS, value time size. Value has to deal with the life hazard and property hazards that are present. Time has to do with the building construction and the amount of operational time that we can have inside of a structure. And the size is the size of the fire and how many gallons of water we're going to need to apply to that fire to put it out. Rather than going through a 13-point SizeUp like Cole's Wealth or Slicers, which are all good and they need to be addressed, I'm taking a different approach on this. So it's not regurgitating the same way we've been teaching SizeUp. I'm teaching you how to identify problems and look and see what needs to be done so that you can come up with a strategy and tactic and then attack the fire. Another big component throughout this book is going to be survivability profile. I cover Chief Steve Marsar from Fire Department of New York, a lot of his work and research on what is a good survivability profile, as well as taking the science that is out there from modern fuels and the heat generated from modern fuels, the heat release rate, and put those two together so that we truly understand the human threshold of a civilian as well as our own with PPE. And we need to be able to work within that environment of human survivability and our own survivability. Otherwise, we're not going to survive the event. So the only way to change that is either not go in or change the interior environment and lower those temperatures so that we are creating an environment that is conducive to a positive survivability profile, as well as a environment where we will most likely survive the event without injury. So in that QAP, I'm bringing it all together, and then I'm attaching the Firefighter Accountability system to that, which I've never seen that addressed in any book. So I'm showing you how to actually use an accountability system that's functional, with some exercises here that you can find a firefighter on the fire ground if you follow this process. So that should be pretty provocative, but that's very new. Then I bring it all together into the fire attack chapter and connect all the dots, from fire dynamics to applying it to building construction, to applying the UL NIST recommendations, and then coming up with the interior fire attack, which is the most dangerous part of the fire ground. You know, ICS is implied throughout the book, but I don't get into ICS. This is not a command manual. This is a book for company officers leading crews into the interior for offensive or exterior defensive fires. That's what this book is for. The ICS, IMS is implied that we're going to follow that. But one thing that it never sat well with me with IMS is that all the hazards happen inside the fire. The most dangerous part of a fire is in the interior. And once we started setting up our ICS organization charts, we started taking the officers and we put them in exterior positions to either run sectors or divisions or groups. These are the people with the knowledge, and they end up being outside of the actual area, where the firefighters are left with acting officers or less experienced firefighters on the inside. How do we get the officer back inside? We all have safety officers, and we need them, but they're on the perimeter of the fire ground. Who's watching out for the safety of the firefighters inside? It's the company officers. And so if we take them out and put them into ICS positions, you're only left with firefighters. And I think that needs to be addressed somehow. I have some ideas. I think perhaps maybe as part of a crew, we should have two officers, one that's going to be fulfilling an ICS function, and the other one that is married to the crew, and that officer is responsible for the whole fire attack with that interior crew. I don't know. There's other ways we can address that, but just to leave it by chance that the crew going in has the knowledge, I think we're missing the boat there. So I'm showing you that. Then we have the fire attack chapter, which puts all the pieces together. And in this book, I'm going to show a company officer how they can actually run a fire, do their SizeUp, identify their problems, come up with their strategy and tactics and the resources needed to run a fire with firefighter accountability for the entire first alarm assignments. So I give you 4 examples of that using a passport accountability board. You don't need to use passport, you can use the dog tags. It's the theory of the system. If you understand how it works, you can use it on any system that you have within your fire department. Even electronic ones or some of the new technologies that are coming out to address firefighter accountability. I like to compare it to using a calculator. If you just were given a calculator without understanding how to add, subtract, multiply, or divide, you can punch in a bunch of numbers, get some numbers, and they don't mean anything to you. But if you know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide by hand first, if you learn how to do the arithmetic, then a calculator makes it all easier. But we're starting to do it the other way around, and we're still missing the boat on that. And then finally, the Highrise chapter is a new chapter, an original chapter. This is my take on it. In addition to the Highrise chapter, the reason why I included a Highrise chapter is because just look at the growth of our country. Cities are built out. Even if you take Seattle, the downtown corridor, they're knocking down buildings that are 1 or 2 stories high, and they're putting up residential high-rises. You can go into any regular city throughout the country, and you're going to find mid-rises that are going to require standpipe operations. So whether the fire is on the 6th floor or the 16th floor or the 60th floor, the standpipe operations and the execution of those operations for the engine company remain the same. So I did a really extensive Highrise chapter in this book. I've used lots of case studies of LODDs, things that went right, things that went wrong throughout this book. So a lot of my theories, my positions are backed up with actual line of duty death case studies throughout the book. In addition to that, there's the regular stuff. We talk about water supply, apparatus positioning. We're going to talk about sprinkler systems, salvage and overhaul. There's ventilation in here, and obviously there's search and rescue. So it covers all the basics, but if we're really going to change and lower the line of duty deaths in our country, then I think we need to look at the curriculum on how we're teaching firefighters how to fight fires. And that's what this book is all about. Like I said, I just didn't decide to write this. This task was offered and given to me, and so I took it as a responsibility to give you everything I have with 38 years of experience total, to give you every thought, every concept. I've vetted it with my peers who I think are the best minds of the fire service, and just diligently put everything together for a complete package. So I think this book is innovative. I think it's going to be provocative. It's going to cause a lot of discussion. There's going to be a lot of you who don't agree with what I have in here, and that's okay. It's one man's perspective. But I think there's nothing else out there on the market like this book right now, and I hope it meets with your approval. So thanks for checking it out on the website www.jonesbartlettlearning.com. So what's different about this book? Well, the first thing was when you look at line of duty deaths, and for many years we have said the average line of duty death is 100 per year, and we've seen a downward decline in that, and that's good. Those numbers are good. However, there's still a disproportionate amount of line of duty deaths in relation to civilians that we're actually rescuing. In other words, firefighters are still dying in buildings when the only life hazard inside was themselves. And that's always bothered me. I think your perspective changes on line of duty deaths when you actually experience them in your department or in your career. In my career, I've experienced 7 and 12 total with friends, close friends from other fire departments. And so that changes your perspective on how you approach firefighting. And so when I look at this all together, there's no acceptable line of duty deaths. We're addressing the problem the wrong way. We come up with rapid intervention teams and firefighter survival skills and self-rescue, and there's a huge emphasis on that. And we need it, I know. I'm not against that. But what I'm saying is we're still not addressing the core problem. Ideally, we don't want to get ourselves into a situation that requires rapid intervention or firefighter self-rescue, self-extrication, survival skills. We do not want to be in that position. So we need to go back and look at the curriculum and say, well, how are we teaching firefighters how to fight fires? And that's what's different about this book. In reality, I spent about 5 years working on this project. I spent 2 years reading all the other strategy and tactics books that were out there. I wanted to get a good pulse on the information that was out there, the theories, the way we were doing business. And I didn't want to regurgitate the same old thing in another engine company book. I had to come from a different perspective. But I needed to know what was out there. After that, I spent about 2 years writing the text and a year with finalizing the edits. So it was about a 5-year project totally. What's different about this book is that I dove into the UL NIST studies and recommendations and conclusions, and I really wanted to understand those well. And then I wanted to apply them, all those recommendations, into a strategy and tactics book. That's probably the biggest difference in here. So again, in looking at how we teach firefighters, you can't understand the UL conclusions, I think, in my opinion, unless you have a good understanding of fire dynamics, which covers fire chemistry, fire science, fire behavior, all those things. You have to understand that to understand the conclusions of UL NIST. The other thing you have to understand is building construction. Now, this isn't a building construction book, but it has a building construction chapter in it because that is the battlefield. That's where we're getting killed, inside the buildings. That's where the fire is throwing us curveballs, whether it's through extension or flashover with the fuels. Everything inside the building is what's killing us. And so we need to understand that battleground, right? So there's a building construction chapter in there. I did my own analysis and review of the UL NIST experiment, so I'm giving you my own take on that in my own words, trying to get you to fully understand it. And again, using case studies and examples on how these recommendations played out. So the first 4 chapters are the introduction, which kind of gives us a base on where the fire service is today. And then I talk about fire dynamics and lay a nice foundation of fire dynamics for you. The building construction, and I end that chapter with understanding the operational times in each building classification 1 through 5, which will come into play later. Then we talk about the UL NIST studies. Okay, so now I'm connecting the dots. This book also has the regular chapters like water supply, equipment. I do cover nozzle innovation, the new technologies for nozzles and hose. But we cover equipment, the water supply, all the basics, forward lay, reverse lay, things like that. Then we get into the SizeUp chapter. Now, in the 3rd edition, SizeUp was only a couple of chapters. It took like half a page of the book. I wrote an entire chapter on SizeUp. It's that important because it's one of the, either a lack of a proper SizeUp or a lack of a 360-degree SizeUp is always in the top 5 factors contributing to a line of duty death. So I really spent a lot of time going through that. So part of SizeUp, I took a different approach from the regular 13-point SizeUp. Coal was wealth, or slicers. Those are all good, but really what we need to do is identify problems. We need to look and see what's going on and evaluate, perform a risk-benefit analysis, and identify problems so that we can solve them. We can't run a fireground by following acronyms. We don't run fires by acronyms. You have to identify problems and then apply solutions like we do with any problem. And so I've come up with the QIAP, I call it, the Quick Incident Action Plan, which lists all our problems. Then we come up with a strategy, tactics, and how many resources we need to carry that out. Finally, I tie that with the passport accountability system. Whether you use dog tags or passports, it's irrelevant, but you have to understand how a functional accountability system works. So in the SizeUp chapter, I'm showing you how a first-in officer, company officer, can run a fire, how they can do a proper SizeUp, identify your problems, come up with strategy and tactics, and then make your initial assignments with the first alarm assignment. I show you how to use the board, and I show you how to keep track of every single firefighter with 4 exercises on how to find a single firefighter in a Mayday situation. I don't think any book has anything demonstrating how an accountability system works. So this book has that. Finally, another provocative, that's going to be a provocative chapter for sure, and it'll cause a lot of discussion. So that's new and innovative as far as textbooks go. Then in chapter 10, which is the fire attack chapter, we go through the different types of strategies, offensive, defensive, and we utilize and implement the UL NIST recommendations. There's a lot of information, including case studies here, on fighting basement fires. In the past, I was always taught to go down the inside stairwell. Now that we understand the UL NIST information better and how flow paths work, and again, there's case studies that tied to these tactics, that's the wrong way to go. We have to rethink how we attack basement fires and ventilate them as well. So we're doing that also. Another key component in this is survivability profile. I base this on the work by Battalion Chief Steve Marsar from the FDNY, who came up with the term in laying out the study of survivability profile. What constitutes a positive survivability profile and which one is a negative survivability profile, using the science of human threshold. How much heat can an unprotected human being actually endure, and the effects of smoke, right? As well as the environment for firefighters, because we need to work in an environment within the rating of our PPE, which is about 500 degrees Fahrenheit to 550 for 17 seconds, 20 seconds. I don't have the right numbers, but if we are above that, we are working in a atmosphere that we may not survive that event, especially if it flashes over. Your chances of surviving a flashover are very, very slim, if at all. So we need to change that interior environment and lower it down to a temperature zone where a civilian can survive, and we will survive as well. So we're going to do that with the fast application of water. So there's a lot of discussion on that. So chapter 10 should be pretty provocative. It'll definitely develop a lot of discussion, and there's a lot on basement fires throughout the book. Then we go through master stream, defensive fires, overhaul, salvage overhaul, property conservation, all the basics. But I included a high-rise chapter in here. There wasn't a high-rise chapter in the original editions, but there is one here because our cities are changing. There's no more real estate going out, everything's going up. Smaller buildings are being knocked down for mid-rise buildings, and it's not uncommon to see a building 6 stories or more in even small towns. Any town with a commercial hotel, motel, chain motel like Holiday Inn or Marriott, those are all standpipe operations. And since the majority of high-rise fires happen below the 12th floor anyway, there's a good chance that any city in the U.S. can have a substantial, quote, high-rise fire, anything above 75 feet, and run all the standpipe operations that you would run in a metropolitan high-rise fire, whether the fire is on the 6th floor, the 16th floor, the 26th floor, or the 60th floor. So all those components come into play, and so we spent a lot of time going through the strategy and tactics for high-rise fires. Again, I base a lot of my perspective on case studies. We revisit the historical fires and talk about the lessons learned. The lessons learned, like from the first interstate fire, were not for Los Angeles alone. Same thing with One Meridian Plaza, was not just for Philadelphia. They need to be implemented into all our Engine Company Fireground strategy and tactics, and so that's what I did in this book. Anyway, it's my best work. I have shared and vetted my ideas, my concepts, my theories with my peers and my mentors, people that I think are the greatest minds in the fire service. And so I've held nothing back. I've given you my best work here. A lot of people aren't going to agree with everything I have in here, and that's fine. I know that. But this is my best work, and my target audience is captains and lieutenants, the company officer, on pretty much everything you need to know about engine company operations and attack and a fire. So thanks for checking this out. I hope you find it good reading. And if you need to get in contact with me, my email is easy. It's all one word, lowercase, spelled out, captainangulo@gmail.com. Thanks for checking it out.